of the Washington Affairs for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Mr. Higgs and Mr. Barry and several other SNCC people and myself through phone have been in touch with each other since a couple of days ago, where we analyzed this bill, House Representative Bill number 14765, that's before the Congress now. And we found the bill to be totally useless and to be totally unnecessary. We found that the President was trying to take himself off of the spot again by putting a bill before Congress that was not needed. We have broken the bill down in terms of the things that it deals with, and we can go through them very quickly one by one. Title I deals with jury selections, and we find that to be totally useless because the system already set up now allows for district judges to pull from the voting list, and that's all it does. And what it does, in fact, is that it has to go through federal district judge. For example, in Mississippi, that would mean a racist like Cox, who was a federal judge appointed by Mr. John Kennedy. The Attorney General has the power to do practically everything that this bill calls for. There is no need for him to have to be told again that he can file lawsuits. That's already guaranteed to him. We purport that the Attorney General needs no litigation to start filing suits in places that have not been desegregated, 94%. I'd like to take a byline to talk about that because during the Canton demonstration, the Attorney General blasted the civil rights organizations, and he said that we had no business on that school. But I'd like to let the Attorney General know something, that school was supposed to be desegregated since 1954, and we have no power or no control in that school, and we hold him responsible for this, and that he's not going to be allowed to shift the blame to us. He is responsible for letting white racists still control that school. Now, as far as the housing part of the bill, the President of the United States can sign an executive order today. The President of the United States can sign an executive order today that would ban 80% of the discrimination in housing, and he's trying to get himself off the hook by putting this bill before Congress, and we will not let him get away with that. We will let him know that we know it is in his power to sign that bill. I don't think there's a need for another bill. I think that there are enough. All you need now is some guts from the federal government to enforce what they say they want to do and to stop their racist policies. We're very disturbed, for example, that this bill does not call for voting registrars. There are now only 44 out of a possible 600. We're disturbed that there's no removal provision for cases to go from the state to the federal court. For example, the Peacock case that just appeared before the Supreme Court that was sent back. There's no provision for that. There is no provision for civil indemnification cases. For example, Mr. Damas, who was shot in Hattiesburg, whose house was fire burnt. There's no provision for that. There is no provision for de facto segregation to stop it, or in fact to even stop what will in fact become de facto segregation tomorrow. And there is no provision to remove local policemen like Rainey and Sheriff Tom Coleman who commit those atrocities. It is again the federal government refusal to deal with the issues and to present us with a lot of words and a lot of bills, and we're no longer going to tolerate that.
Mr. Carmichael, Mr. Higgs testified to those provisions that you in another bill. What is the position of
SNCC asked for those things. They were brought before when the bill was sharing, and they were all removed systematically. And it seems to me that if the President is serious about what he's doing, he ought to at least take the air of one of the organizations that have had the battle scars of the Deep South, which he proposes to deal with.
Mr. Carmichael, how do you expect to get bills through if you alienate support by some of the radical statements being made?
I don't know that I alienate support. I think people alienate themselves.
How do you mean that?
How do I mean what?
That people alienate themselves.
I have not alienated anybody.
Are you satisfied with the reaction you've had around the country from what you've been saying in recent weeks?
I think the country has to deal with its own racist attitude. It has to deal with it, not me. I'm not a racist. The country is racist.
Mr. Carmichael, there are indications that you've alienated Martin Luther King, statements he's made the last couple of days.
Sir, may I remind you of the purpose of the
me that this is a press conference in which you are going to direct the questions?
I would just like to remind the state purpose of the meeting.
I was in the middle of a question.
Any
Can I-
kind of question is just limited to just
When,
this bill.
when the press conference was called this morning, the press was told that it was
Well, is it
concerned the
just limited,
president's
well,
bill.
is it just limited to the bill or is it open to anything?
No,
to the bill?
it is limited to a discussion of the president's
You
legislation.
tell me that.
Is there anybody here who has a
Mr.
question about
Carmichael,
the
is that
bill?
correct? Have you limited this press conference? Are
This
you
press
rejecting
conference,
questions on other
Mr.
questions?
Doyle, was called to discuss the president's bill. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee called
You
this one.
refuse to discuss all other subjects?
I refuse to discuss all of this.
Good day.
Thank you, Mr. Carmichael.
Are there any other questions concerning the bill?
We're trying to find out what's left to discuss.
We called a press conference on the bill. Certainly, I think that men of the press would know that if you call a press conference on the bill, that's what the press conference is going to be on, not what the press wants it to be on.
You're not proposing any refinements to the bill.
I beg your pardon, Mr.
You're
President?
not proposing refinements to the bill, are you?
No, I'm just saying the bill now, as it exists, is totally useless.
Are you making specific proposals for making it useful?
Well, we'll talk to Mr. Higgs about that. We proposed, the things that we proposed were left out, so I don't know what we can do now.
Does this mean you would support a bill that Mr. Higgs proposed?
Yes, well, we helped to write that bill. We certainly would support it.
Carmichael, the points that you raised as proposed amendments to the bill are also supported by the Civil Rights Leadership Conference. Is that so?
Bill can speak to it.
Carmichael?
Mr. Higgs is our representative there, and we had a short discussion. He can answer it best.
Well, only a few of these provisions that Mr. Carmichael
Which
has
ones
mentioned.
are not part of the
Well,
leadership
the
conference?
provisions forcing immediate federal registrars throughout the South were specifically turned down by the Leadership Conference.
Anything else?
The provisions preventing the gerrymandering of districts, election districts, qualifications for office of candidates, all these things that the states of Mississippi and Alabama are doing right now, provisions to prevent this, were turned down by the Leadership Conference.
Gerrymandering of school districts?
No, of election districts, provisions in terms of ending de facto segregation. These were turned down and were not recommended by the Leadership Conference, as well as a number of others, but these are some specific ones.
Well, the other points you raised, such as indemnification, is supported by the Leadership Conference. I'd like to ask you simply this. Do you support the bill as far as it goes? Are you saying the extent and the recommendations that are made by the bill you don't support?
Well, it's not a question of support. It's just a joke. I mean, it's a plan. It's totally useless.
The bill provides nothing that we don't already have.
That's precisely what we're saying.
Well, the bill does recommend, I don't want to discuss the content,
President's bill.
and you refuse to discuss the resignation reported from Atlanta, Mr. Lewis.
It means that this press conference was called to talk about the president's proposed bill.
In addition, at 7:30 tonight, Mr. Carmichael is speaking before the core convention, where he will discuss these and other matters.
Tonight at 7:30
In Baltimore?
in Baltimore.
As a point of information, it was made clear to each press person called this morning the purpose and the sole purpose of this meeting. So I failed to understand. Amazing.
Well, it was never made clear that we limited only to
So it was stated that the purpose and not a purpose. We thought it was made clear.
Mr. Carmichael, you said that the president is trying to get off the hook by proposing this bill before Congress, and you used your words that we will not let him get away with it. What do you mean by that? How will we not let him get away with it?
I mean that the president can sign a bill today that would stop discrimination in 80% of the houses that we have, and that we will not let him get away with getting off with the responsibility by throwing it through Congress and having it stopped by a lot of of racists in the South and causing a lot of controversy, that he can do it if he wants to. And that the reason why he's doing this is because he knows precisely that that bill will not pass, and that he will get off as a friend of the civil rights movement once more by saying, I have tried my best. And we will not let him get away with that sham. That's what we need.
Program for doing it.
Expose him, Hing, as we're doing now at this press conference, Mr. Terry.
Mr. Carmichael, you were invited to a White House conference to discuss some of these issues with the President should do. Why didn't you attend that conference?
We're here to talk about the Civil Rights Bill, Mr. Steele. I'm talking about this Civil Rights Bill, which we find to be totally useless and a waste of time, and which the President of the United States is using as a sham, as a ruse to make himself look as a friend of the Civil Rights movement.
What are you going to talk about tonight?
If you show up at 7:30, you'll hear. I'm speaking at the core convention.
Can you give us an idea of what you're going to talk about?
Discuss the things in the movement and new trends in the movement and which way SNCC sees the movement should go.
Were you aware that the White House conference agenda included discussion on refinement of the President's bill?
We found that to be totally useless, too, and we've been proven true since then.
You need to be used to go to the White House conference and discuss the bill.
Mr. Steele, I remind you of the purpose of this press conference.
I'm asking Mr. Carmichael, you feel it would have been totally useless to discuss the civil rights
The
bill?
conference today was called for the purpose of a bill. Now,
You suggested it tonight, what question I'm asking him about the bill?
Mr. Still, you received our press release on the White House conference. If you reread it, if you need a copy, we'll be glad to send you one. It explains precisely what our position was, and it covers your question.
You feel it would have been useless to discuss the bill at the White House conference?
We'd like to say that we think that congressmen ought to speak out to this point. They ought to say to the country that not that they're unwilling to vote for this bill, but they ought to say that this bill is a waste of time, and there's no need for them to bring it before Congress.
Do any of the civil rights groups, to your knowledge, share your position that the bill as now written is useless?
I can only speak for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Did you discuss it with other
No, I have not discussed it with other people.
Mr. Carmichael.
Since we've got some time left to return to other matters,
No, gentlemen, if that's the end of the press conference, I'd like to get a 15-minute break. Thank you very much.
gentlemen, I'd like to get...
We feel that the bill... We feel that proposed bill, House Representative 147765, now before the Congress, is totally useless. It tries to accomplish nothing, and the President himself tries to remove himself from the hook from doing the things which he can already do. That all of the things he asks for is within his power, and that we feel that he ought to exercise that power and stop trying to shift the responsibility. We hold him responsible for executing all orders that are now on the different titles of that bill.